ASTRO station. The crown jewel of human ingenuity. Floated silently among the stars. A beacon of trade and technological advancement. It housed millions and represented humanity's unrelenting ambition. On the 42nd floor of a luxury apartment tower. Darin Alaric, the station's chief strategist, lay in peaceful slumber. Unaware that this night would forever alter the course of his life. A strange sensation pulled Darin from his dreams. His body tensed. A chill running down his spine. Something was wrong. The air was heavy. Charged with an invisible threat. Though the room was silent. His instincts screamed that he was no longer alone. Keeping his breathing steady. He pretended to remain asleep. His trained senses attuned to the faintest anomalies. Then he heard it soft. Deliberate footsteps. Too light to be human. His pulse quickened. But his mind remained sharp. Whoever had breached his sanctuary was a professional. A sliver of light from the window illuminated the intruder as she approached. Darin's heart skipped a beat. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with an iridescent emerald hue. As though kissed by the starlight itself. Her eyes, molten gold, glowed with predatory focus. Clad in a sleek, black combat suit that hugged her athletic frame. She moved like liquid shadow. A deadly blade glinting in her hand. Darin knew he had only seconds to act. With a burst of motion, he rolled off the bed just as the knife plunged into the spot where he had been lying moments earlier. The cold floor sent a jolt through his bare feet. But there was no time to dwell on discomfort. His attacker was relentless. Her strikes swift and precise. Leaving him with little room to maneuver. "Who are you?" Darin demanded. His voice steadied despite the chaos. "You don't need to know," she replied. Her tone smooth yet cold as steel. "All you need to know is that tonight is your last." Her words were as sharp as her blade. But Darin caught something in her expression, a flicker of hesitation. A crack in her otherwise unyielding resolve. It was subtle. Almost imperceptible. But it was there. Seizing the moment, Darin lunged. Catching her wrist and deflecting her next strike. The two grappled. Their movements a deadly dance of strength and skill. For a moment, they were locked in a tense standoff. Her glowing eyes boring into his icy blue ones. Then, unexpectedly, she hesitated. Her fierce gaze softened. And her breath hitched. Darin's grip faltered. Just enough for her to slip free. Before he could react. She leapt backward and disappeared into the shadows as swiftly as she had come. Leaving him alone with his racing thoughts and the echoes of their encounter. He stood in the dim light of the room. Breathing heavily. His mind a whirlwind of questions. Who was she? How had she bypassed the impenetrable security system he had designed? And why? In that critical moment. Had she hesitated? Darin turned to the panoramic window. Where the glow of the nearest planet cast a faint luminescence over the void of space. He didn't yet know it. But this night marked the beginning of a journey that would unravel secrets. Ignite unexpected alliances. And challenge everything he believed about loyalty. Survival. And love. Darin Alaric strode into the Grand Council chamber of ASTRO station. Still replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. The chamber's high ceilings and transparent walls offered sweeping views of the stars beyond. But today, the majestic backdrop failed to calm his racing thoughts. His attacker had vanished. Leaving behind only questions, and a gnawing sense of unease. The council meeting had been called to address escalating tensions with the Emeraldian race. Darin suspected it might offer a clue about his mysterious intruder. As the chief strategist, he was expected to maintain a composed, analytical demeanor. Yet the memory of those glowing eyes and the blade aimed at his heart refused to fade. "Commander Alaric," called High Chancellor Alaris, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the gathered officials. "Join us. There's someone you need to meet." Darin's stomach tightened as a new figure entered the room. She walked with measured grace, her emerald skin catching the light, her eyes a molten gold that Darin instantly recognized. It was her, the assassin. But now, she was dressed in a formal diplomatic uniform, her lethal elegance disguised by the veneer of protocol. "This is Arya Vera," Alaris announced. "She is the emissary from the Emeraldian Dominion, here to negotiate terms of cooperation regarding recent disputes over trade routes and territorial boundaries." Darin masked his shock behind a neutral expression, his mind racing. An emissary? Was her attack on him sanctioned by her government? Or had it been a rogue operation? He scanned her face for answers. But Arya's composure was impeccable. "Commander Alaric," she said, her voice steady, though he didn't miss the subtle tension in her tone. "It's a pleasure to meet you formally." Darin's lips twitched in a faint smirk. "Formally? Indeed." A flicker of recognition passed between them. A silent acknowledgement of the duel they had shared. But there was no time for personal confrontations, the meeting was underway. As the council discussed trade agreements and security measures, Darin watched Arya closely. She navigated the room with practiced diplomacy, her words measured and persuasive. Yet, beneath her polished exterior, he sensed an undercurrent of conflict. She was playing a dangerous game. But for whose benefit? When the meeting adjourned, Darin intercepted her in one of the station's quieter corridors. "Emissary Vera," he called, his tone laced with irony. "A word?" Arya turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Commander, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "I think you know," he said, stepping closer. "Why did you break into my quarters? Was it a test? An attack? Or something else entirely?" For a moment, Arya hesitated, her guard slipping. "It's complicated," she admitted, her voice low. "What happened last night wasn't sanctioned by the Dominion, not officially." Darin folded his arms, his gaze sharp. "Then why?" Arya exhaled, glancing down the empty corridor as if ensuring they were alone. "Emeraldians have a unique tradition. When a potential adversary or ally shows exceptional promise, they send a warrior to test their worth. It's not meant to end in death, usually. But there are factions within my people who disagree with our leader's methods." Darin's brow furrowed. "So, you were sent to test me?" "Yes," she said, her voice tinged with something that might have been regret. "Your strategies, your reforms, they've disrupted certain interests. The purest faction sees you as a threat to our traditions." "And you?" Darin asked, his tone softening. "Do you share their views?" Arya's golden eyes met his, unwavering. "I don't," she said firmly. "That's why I'm here, not as an assassin, but as an emissary. There's more at stake than either of us fully understands." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Darin studied her, torn between mistrust and an inexplicable urge to believe her. Before he could respond, a chime from his communicator interrupted them. "Commander Alaric," came the voice of his aide. "We have a situation in the Central Archives. Unauthorized access detected." Arya stiffened, her gaze snapping to Darin. "It's them," she said. "The purists. They're trying to destroy evidence." How do you know that? Darin demanded. Because it's exactly what I would do, she replied. Already moving toward the nearest transport tube. Are you coming, Commander? Darin hesitated only a moment before following. Whatever the truth about Arya Vera, she was the key to understanding this growing threat. The archives were a labyrinth of data repositories, housing everything from trade agreements to military blueprints. By the time Darin and Arya arrived, the intruders had already bypassed several layers of security. The hum of plasma torches echoed through the halls. The telltale sign of Emeraldian technology. We need to act fast, Arya said, pulling a compact weapon from her belt. It was sleek, alien in design, and clearly not standard issue for a diplomat. Darin raised an eyebrow, but she offered no explanation. As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, the first sign of the intruders came into view, 3 Emeraldian agents working to override a secured terminal. Arya motioned for silence, her movements fluid and precise. Darin, though skeptical, followed her lead. With a burst of coordinated action, they incapacitated the agents before they could react. Arya moved with deadly efficiency, her strikes calculated and swift. Darin couldn't help but marvel at her skill, even as he reminded himself of her dangerous nature. We don't have much time, Arya said, accessing the terminal. They'll have backup. What are they after? Darin asked, scanning the area for more threats. Records, she replied. Proof of their involvement in smuggling weapons and undermining peace talks. If they erase it, they can operate without accountability. Before Darin could respond, a distant explosion rocked the archive. The purists were escalating their efforts. We need to split up, Arya said, glancing at Darin. You secure the primary servers. I'll handle their reinforcements. Darin hesitated. How do I know you won't use this as an opportunity to disappear? Arya's expression softened, her voice quieter. Because I need you to trust me. If we're going to stop them, we have to work together. Something in her tone struck a chord. And against his better judgment, Darin nodded. Fine. But don't make me regret it. As they parted ways, Darin couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far larger than either of them had anticipated. Darin Alaric leaned against the doorway of the makeshift command center in Astria Station, scanning the chaotic scene. Technicians worked furiously to restore systems compromised during the purist infiltration. Although they had secured the archives, the cost had been high. Darin's instincts told him the purists were far from finished. Arya Vera stood at a terminal, her emerald skin glowing faintly under the station's dim lights. She had traded her diplomatic uniform for a practical combat suit, blending her deadly efficiency with an air of authority that unsettled and intrigued Darin. Her eyes flickered to his as if sensing his presence. They won't stop here, Arya said, her voice steady but grim. This was just the beginning. Then let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next, Darin replied, stepping into the room. But first, I need answers. Arya sighed, leaning against the terminal. You want to know why I stayed instead of running, she said. I could have disappeared. Left you to handle this alone. And yet you didn't, Darin said, folding his arms. Why? She hesitated, her golden eyes softening. Because I believe in what you're trying to do. Unity between humans and Emeraldians, it's not just a strategy to me. It's survival. Her words carried a sincerity that caught Darin off guard. Before he could reply, an officer approached with a data pad. Commander. We've intercepted encrypted transmissions from the Purists. They're planning another operation, this time targeting the station's oxygen farms. Darin cursed under his breath. ASTRO's oxygen farms were a lifeline. Not only for its residents but for the surrounding colonies. If the Purists sabotaged them, the consequences would be catastrophic. Arya straightened, her expression hardening. We can't let that happen. If they succeed, they'll cripple your people's trust in interspecies cooperation. Agreed, Darin said. But we're going to need a plan, and fast. The oxygen farms were located on the outermost ring of the station. A sprawling complex of atmospheric processors surrounded by dense corridors. The layout offered countless hiding places for intruders. And Darin knew they would be at a disadvantage. As he and Arya approached the control hub, the tension between them was palpable. Though they were united by necessity, years of mistrust between their species lingered in the air. You're awfully quiet, Arya said, breaking the silence. Second thoughts about trusting me? Let's just say I'm still assessing your motives, Darin replied. She smirked faintly. Fair. But if it helps, I'd rather fight beside you than against you. Darin glanced at her, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. I'll hold you to that. Their banter was cut short as the proximity alarm on Darin's wrist console buzzed. The Purists were already here. Darin motioned for Arya to follow as they slipped into the shadows, moving with practiced precision. Through the dimly lit corridors, they spotted a team of Emeraldian operatives working to sabotage a primary oxygen processor. Darin and Arya exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Darin moved first, his combat training kicking in as he incapacitated one of the operatives with a swift strike. Arya followed, her movements fluid and deadly. The remaining operatives fought back, but the combined strength of human tactics and Emeraldian skill quickly overwhelmed them. As the dust settled, Darin turned to Arya, who was inspecting a small device one of the operatives had been carrying. What is it? He asked. A detonator, she said grimly. They weren't just sabotaging the processor, they were planning to blow the entire complex. Darin's jaw tightened. We need to find the rest of these devices before it's too late. As they worked their way through the oxygen farms, defusing the Purists' traps, the tension between Darin and Arya began to ease. Their movements became more synchronized, their communication more intuitive. What had started as an uneasy alliance was evolving into something resembling trust. During a brief moment of respite, Darin turned to Arya. You're good at this. Too good for someone who claims to be just an emissary. Arya's gaze flickered, her expression unreadable. Let's just say I've had unconventional training. That's not an answer, Darin said, his tone firm but not unkind. Arya sighed, running a hand through her hair. I was trained as an infiltrator, a weapon to be used against your kind. But I started to question what we were doing. The Purists want to preserve our traditions, but their methods are destroying us. That's why I took this mission, to find another way. Darin studied her for a moment, then nodded. And do you believe in what we're doing here? I do, Arya said, meeting his gaze. More than I expected. Before Darin could respond, another alarm sounded. The final device had been armed, and the countdown had already begun. The last detonator was located in the heart of the processor complex, surrounded by reinforced plating and security measures. As Darin and Arya approached, they encountered heavy resistance from the remaining Purists. The firefight that followed was intense. A deadly game of cat and mouse in the labyrinthine corridors. Darin fought with calculated precision. His tactical mind predicting the enemy's movements. Beside him, Arya was a whirlwind of grace and power. Her strikes precise and devastating. Together, they carved a path to the detonator. But when they reached it, the timer had only seconds left. "Can you disable it?" Darin asked. His voice urgent. Arya knelt by the device. Her fingers moving with practiced speed. "I can try. But if I make a mistake..." "You won't," Darin said firmly. "I trust you." Her eyes flicked to his. A flicker of surprise crossing her face. Then she nodded. Refocusing on the task. With only moments to spare. The timer stopped. The detonator deactivated. Arya exhaled a shaky breath. Sitting back on her heels. That was too close. Close. But we did it, Darin said. Offering her a hand. She hesitated for a heartbeat before taking it. Allowing him to pull her to her feet. As they made their way back to the command center, Darin couldn't help but feel a shift in their dynamic. For the first time, he saw not an enemy or a threat, but an ally, someone who understood the stakes as deeply as he did. And though neither of them said it, a bond had begun to form. One forged in the crucible of danger and necessity. The lights on Astria's station flickered ominously, signaling a growing sense of unease. Darin Alaric stood in the central command room. His gaze fixed on a holographic map of the station. Red markers dotted the display. Each one representing an area of suspected infiltration by Emeraldian purist operatives. The enemy was no longer hiding in the shadows, they were making their move. "We've intercepted more transmissions," said Lieutenant Mara, his tactical officer. Her voice taut with urgency. "The purists are organizing an all-out assault. Their operatives are targeting critical infrastructure across the station." Darin's jaw tightened. "They're pushing for chaos. If they cripple Astrius, it'll validate their propaganda that cooperation with humans is a threat to their survival." From across the room, Arya Vera stepped forward. Her presence commanding despite the tension in the air. "This isn't just an attack," she said. Her golden eyes narrowing. "It's a declaration of war." The room fell silent. The weight of her words hanging heavy. Darin met her gaze. "Then we make sure they fail." The first explosion rocked the lower levels of the station, sending shockwaves through the towering structure. Reports flooded in, a power grid sabotage in Sector 12. A fire breaking out near the medical bay. And an assault on the station's defense systems. The purists were attacking on multiple fronts, forcing Darin and his team to stretch their resources thin. Arya and Darin moved quickly to assess the damage. As they entered the damaged power grid, the scent of burnt circuitry filled the air. Sparks rained down from exposed wires. And emergency sirens blared in the background. "They're trying to overload the main reactor," Arya said, examining the destroyed control panels. "If they succeed, the entire station will be destabilized." Darin gestured toward a team of engineers working frantically to stabilize the systems. "We can't let that happen. You said this wasn't just an attack, what else are they after?" Arya hesitated. Her expression darkening. "The purists believe that eradicating human influence is the only way to preserve our people's traditions. If they take Astrius, they'll claim it as a victory against corruption. Their message will spread like wildfire." Darin clenched his fists. "Then we take the fight to them. No more reacting, we need to strike back." The turning point came when a high-ranking purist operative, captured during a skirmish, revealed their ultimate objective. Darin and Arya stood in an interrogation room. The operative's defiance palpable even in chains. "You've already lost," the operative sneered. His emerald skin glinting under the harsh lights. "The station's leadership is fractured. Your people grow weaker with every passing moment." Darin leaned in. His voice cold and steady. "What's the plan? What are you after?" The operative's smirk widened. "You think this is about Astrius? This is about proving that Emeraldian purity cannot be tainted. And what better way to do that than to destroy the one thing that threatens us most?" Arya stepped forward. Her voice like a blade. "What do you mean?" The operative's eyes gleamed with malice as he looked directly at her. "You. Arya Vera. And what you represent. The child you carry is an abomination. The purists will not allow it to exist." Darin froze. His gaze snapping to Arya. What is he talking about? Arya's expression wavered. A mix of fear and defiance flashing across her face. "Darin. Before she could finish, the station trembled with another explosion. This one closer than the others. The operative laughed as alarms blared. "You're too late. We've already set the final stage." Darin and Arya rushed to the command center, where the holographic map displayed a new and dire threat. A massive purist warship had arrived in Astrius orbit, deploying boarding pods and bombarding the station's outer defenses. "They're going for a complete takeover," Lieutenant Mara reported. Her voice strained. "If they breach the central control hub, they'll gain access to every system on the station." Arya's fists clenched. "They're here for me, and the child." Darin turned to her. His voice firm. "Then we make sure they don't get either." The station erupted into chaos as purist forces swarmed through its corridors. Darin led a team of security personnel to defend the control hub, while Arya coordinated with Emeraldian defectors who had allied with the humans. For the first time, Darin saw the unity he had worked so hard to achieve in action, humans and Emeraldians fighting side by side. In the heart of the station, Darin and Arya found themselves cornered in a high-stakes battle. The purists had unleashed their elite warriors, trained to exploit human weaknesses. The fight was brutal. The air thick with the clash of plasma blades and gunfire. Darin's tactical mind worked in overdrive, directing his team to exploit the environment to their advantage. Meanwhile, Arya fought with a ferocity that was both beautiful and terrifying. Her movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, as she defended not only herself but the future she carried within her. Amid the chaos, Darin and Arya managed to hold the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive. The purist forces began to falter, their confidence shaken by the unexpected resilience of their opponents. As the tide turned, Darin and Arya confronted General Solon, the purist leader who had orchestrated the attack. Solon, a towering figure with scars that marked his years of battle, stood defiant in the station's central chamber. "You've betrayed everything our people stand for, Arya," Solon snarled. "You've sided with the enemy. I've sided with the future." Arya shot back, her voice unwavering. "Your hatred will destroy us all." The confrontation escalated into a fierce battle. Solon was a formidable opponent, his strength and cunning pushing Darin and Arya to their limits. But together, their combined skills proved too much. In a final, decisive moment, they defeated Solon, breaking the purists' hold on Astrius. As the station's systems stabilized and the remaining purist forces surrendered, Darin and Arya stood amidst the wreckage, their breaths ragged but victorious. The battle had been won, but the cost was clear. The station bore the scars of the conflict. And the threat of the purists lingered like a shadow. Darin turned to Arya. His voice steadied despite the exhaustion in his eyes. This isn't over. They'll come back. Arya nodded. Her hand resting lightly on her abdomen. Let them. We've already proven one thing tonight, they can't break what we've built. As they looked out over the recovering station, the bond between them felt unshakable. Together. They had faced the rising tide of extremism, and together. They would prepare for whatever came next. The aftermath of the purists' failed assault left Astria station in a fragile state. Engineers scrambled to repair damage to critical systems. And medics worked tirelessly to treat the wounded. Yet amidst the chaos, a sense of unity had begun to take root. Humans and Emeraldians, once wary allies, now moved side by side. Their shared struggles forging bonds that transcended their differences. Darin Alaric stood in the observation deck overlooking the vast expanse of space. The stars shone brightly against the darkness. A reminder of the vast unknowns still ahead. Beside him, Arya Vera was quiet. Her golden eyes fixed on the distant nebulae. Though the battle had been won, the war against the purists was far from over. A secure transmission came through the station's encrypted channels. The sender was an ally Darin had trusted in past campaigns, Dr. Ren Solvik. A human geneticist stationed on Irinder Prime. A remote research colony known for its advancements in cross-species biology. The message was clear: bring Arya to Irinder. We need to ensure her safety, and the child's. Darin turned to Arya after reviewing the message. Irinder is isolated. Heavily fortified. If the purists come for us again, it's the safest place we can be. Arya hesitated. Her hand instinctively brushing her abdomen. Do you think they'll stop hunting us if we leave? No, Darin admitted. But we'll have the time and resources to prepare. The child isn't just a symbol of unity, it's proof that their ideology is wrong. That makes it the greatest threat to their power. After a moment's thought, Arya nodded. Then we go. The journey to Irinder Prime was fraught with tension. Traveling through uncharted space. Their small transport vessel was constantly at risk of detection. Darin monitored every sensor reading. His military instincts keeping him alert. Meanwhile, Arya seemed lost in thought. Her usual confidence replaced by an air of vulnerability. One night, as they sat in the dim glow of the ship's control panel, Darin broke the silence. You've been quiet. What's on your mind? Arya hesitated. Then spoke softly. This child. It's more than I ever imagined. It's not just ours, it's a bridge between our worlds. But bridges are fragile. Darin reached out, placing a reassuring hand on hers. We'll protect it. Together. Her golden eyes met his. And for a moment, the weight of their mission felt lighter. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for a future worth building. Upon arriving at Irinder Prime, the stark beauty of the planet took their breath away. Its sprawling forests glowed with bioluminescent flora. And its crystalline structures reflected the twin suns in shimmering hues. The research facility was nestled in a secure valley. Heavily fortified and virtually invisible to outside sensors. Dr. Solvik greeted them with urgency, leading them into a high-tech lab filled with holographic displays and scanning equipment. We've been tracking your situation closely, he said, gesturing to a glowing model of an Emeraldian DNA strand merged with a human one. This child is more than a genetic anomaly, it's a breakthrough. The integration of your species' traits is unprecedented. Arya studied the display. Her expression guarded. What does that mean for us? Dr. Solvik hesitated. It means the child's development is accelerating. Its energy signature is unlike anything we've seen before. And that could attract more than just the purists. Darin frowned. What kind of energy signature? The child's genetic makeup seems to draw from both of your species' latent abilities. Solvik explained. Emeraldians have an innate connection to energy fields. And humans possess a unique adaptability. Combined. The result is extraordinary. Aria's hand drifted protectively to her abdomen. Is it dangerous? No, Solvik reassured her. But it's powerful. That power could be a beacon, or a weapon. The days on Erinder passed in a tense rhythm. Darin and Aria trained together, honing their combat skills and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with the purists. The facility's scientists worked tirelessly to study the child's unique biology, while engineers upgraded the colony's defenses. Amidst the preparations, Darin and Aria found moments of quiet solace. Sitting by a bioluminescent stream one evening, Aria opened up about her fears. I've spent my whole life fighting for survival. Now, I'm fighting for something I don't fully understand. How can I protect a future I can't even picture? Darin took her hand. His voice steady. You don't have to do it alone. Whatever comes, we face it together. Her lips curved into a faint smile. You always know what to say. Don't you? Not always, he admitted. But when it matters, I try. The peace of Erinder was shattered one night when the facility's sensors detected an approaching fleet. The purists had found them. Alarms blared as Darin and Aria rushed to the command center. Through the holographic display, they saw dozens of Emeraldian warships descending through the atmosphere. They've brought everything, Aria murmured, her eyes wide. They're scared, Darin said, his voice resolute. They know what's at stake. Dr. Solvik entered the room, his expression grim. The child's energy signature is amplifying. It's possible they tracked it here. Darin glanced at Aria, who was visibly conflicted. What do we do? She asked. We fight, Darin replied. But we do it on our terms. He turned to the room, issuing orders with the precision of a seasoned commander. Fortify the defenses. Coordinate with the Emeraldian defectors. And prepare for evacuation if it comes to that. As the colony braced for the impending attack, Darin and Aria shared a quiet moment in the armory. She fastened her combat gear, her movement steady but tense. This might be our last stand, she said softly. It won't be, Darin replied, his voice firm. We've come too far to let them win. She looked at him, her golden eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. Promise me you'll protect the child. No matter what happens. I promise, he said, his gaze unwavering. But I'm not losing you either. As they stepped into the battle, side by side, their bond felt unbreakable. Together, they would face the storm, and whatever lay beyond. The purist fleet descended upon Erinder Prime, their warships blotting out the twin suns. Explosions rippled across the colony's perimeter as Darin and Aria led the defenders into battle. The Emeraldian defectors fought alongside human soldiers, their combined strength a testament to the unity they had worked so hard to forge. In the heart of the chaos, Aria's energy surged. The child within her radiated a protective aura, a shimmering field that repelled enemy attacks. Darin fought relentlessly, his strategic mind anticipating the purists' every move, while Aria's warrior instincts turned the tide in their favor. As the battle reached its climax, the purist leader, General Solon, confronted them. His hatred burned bright. But Darin and Aria's combined strength overwhelmed him. In a final desperate act, Solon attempted to destroy the colony's core reactor. But Aria's energy shield absorbed the blast, saving everyone. With the purists defeated, the colony stood victorious. The energy radiating from Aria and the child became a beacon. Not of destruction, but of hope. News of the battle spread across the galaxy, igniting a movement for unity between humans and Emeraldians. Months later, on a rebuilt Astrea station, Darin and Aria presented their child, a perfect blend of their two species, to an assembly of human and Emeraldian leaders. The child, named Elian, symbolized the future they had fought for, a world where unity triumphed over division. As Darin and Aria stood together, watching the assembly embrace the promise of a new era, Darin whispered, "We didn't just survive, we changed everything." Aria smiled, her golden eyes soft. Together,